Today is the 16th of August 2016, and we're going to take up another story from The Hidden Lamp, Stories from 25 Centuries of Awakened Women, edited by Florence Kaplow and Susan Moon. And this story that we're going to take up tonight is called Say and Her Soul Are Separated, and it's also case number 35 in Mumonkan. We'll be reading the version that is told in Hidden Lamp, but then drawing on the Mumonkan version for the commentary and the verse. And we'll just start by reading the story that is behind the case. The case is very short; it's just a question. And then the commentary and the verse, and then we'll look at each of them. And a little bit about the master as well. Say was the beloved daughter of Chokan. In childhood she played with her cousin Ochu, and Senjo's father, Say's father, jokingly told him that they were betrothed. They believed him and later fell in love. When her father told her she would marry another man, they were heartbroken. Ochu left the village in a boat before the marriage. As he left, he saw a figure running along the bank, calling to him. It was Say. Joyfully, she joined him, and they travelled far away, where they married and had 2 children. 5 years went by, and Say longed to see her parents and asked their forgiveness. They travelled back to their village, and Ochu went to her father, told him the story, and apologized for them both. Chokan, astonished, asked Ochu, "What girl are you talking about?" "Your daughter, Say," replied Ochu. Chokan said, "My daughter, Say? Ever since you left, she's been sick in bed, unable to speak." Then Ochu brought Say up from the boat. As they approached her parents' door, the Say who had been sick got up from her bed, smiling. Then the 2 Says met and merged into one. Say said, "I saw Ochu going away, and that night I dreamed that I ran after his boat. But now I cannot tell you which was really me, the one that went away in the boat or the one that stayed at home." Later, Zen Master Goso asked, Say was separated from her soul. Which was the real Say? And that last bit is the case in the Mumonkan. Commentary. If you realize the one, you will know that we pass from one husk to another like travellers stopping at an inn. But if this is not yet clear, don't rush about wildly. When earth, water, fire and air suddenly separate, you'll be like a crab struggling in boiling water with its 7 arms and 8 legs. Don't say I didn't warn you. And the verse. The moon among the clouds is ever the same, different from each other, the mountain and the valley. How wonderful, how blessed. Is this one? Is this 2? Just a little bit of biographical material on this master. His Japanese name is Goso. We'll stick with that. So we go through this koan. His Chinese name, Wuzu Fayan. He was a Rinzai master, the Tang dynasty. He died in 1104, aged about 80. He was ordained relatively late in life, at the age of 35. And he started off, when he was first ordained, he became a scholar monk at Chengdu, which was his home city in Sichuan. And the city Chengdu is still today a centre for Dharmic practice. There's a huge Vajrayana monastery there. He studied in one of Buddhism's philosophical schools, the consciousness-only school, sometimes also known as the Yogacara school. Just a little bit about his training. Spiritual journey. One day when Goso was studying, he read the following. It is said in Buddhism that when a bodhisattva sees with his satori eye, the working and the principle are fused, circumstances and the essence are unified, and subjectivity and objectivity are not separated. A non-Buddhist scholar argued against this, saying, if subjectivity and objectivity are not separated, how can that fact itself be proved? No one could answer, but the Venerable Genjo spoke out. It is the same as if one realizes personally how cold or warm the water is by drinking it himself. So this whole passage Goso read, and then it roused in him a question. He said to himself, I know cold and warm, but what is it to realize it personally? What is it when we experience something? What is it to know that the water is cold or warm? So he went to his teacher at the time and asked his teacher this question, but his teacher could not clarify it for him. And he said, if you want to solve this question, go to the south and ask a Zen master. And so he went off. He left Chengdu and went wandering, studying under different masters at different places, until at a certain point he was studying with a master, a Zen teacher called Hakuin Shutan. And he was one day in Hakuin's presence when he scolded another monk, teaching him. And there was something about this that sort of girded Goso's loins and inspired him to practice more intensively. And then he heard another teaching by Master Shutan. He said, there are several Zen monks from Mount Ro, all of whom have had satori. If you should let them speak, they could give beautiful talks. If you asked them regarding various koan, they could answer clearly. If you wanted them to write a pithy commentary, they could do so nicely. And yet they have not attained it. And this little talk was just like the last sort of ignition he needed to really be gripped by the great doubt. And a short time after this, he experienced a deep awakening. He then taught for 40 years. he was said to be quite a straightforward and unassuming teacher with a very plain style. He used to refer to himself as Uncle Toe of Rest River. Toe was his family name. Or sometimes he would refer to himself as the fellow who lives somewhere or other at the foot of East Mountain. He appears 4 times in the Mumon Khan, and this koan is a subtle one of his, and also another famous koan that he created, the buffalo passes through the window, is another very subtle and considered to be quite difficult koan. The little sample of his teaching in one of Roshi Kapleau's books, Straight to the Heart of the Zen, and it captures something of his humanity. And it was a talk that he gave in his old age, late in his teaching career. And he says, "Yesterday I found a certain passage, and I wondered if I should bring it up before all of you. But as I am an old man, I've forgotten the whole thing entirely. For some time I thought about it, but it wouldn't come back to me." He was silent for a moment. Then he said, I have forgotten. And then he added, there's a Mahayana Dharani named the Wise Enlightening King. If you recite it, you remember what you have forgotten. Goso then recited the mantra, Anaro Rokuke Shak Baka, and clapped his hands. I remember. If you try to find a Buddha, you never see one. If you search for a patriarch, you will never meet one. The sweet melon is sweet to the root. The bitter melon is bitter to the root. And Roshi Kapleau comments on this. He says, if you try to find a Buddha, you can't see one. And if you try to exert yourself to become a good person, you'll never be one. Often our trying to be a good person gets in the way. It undermines us. To be a good and loving person is the outcome of all kinds of different streams of effort, and it's something that unfolds, not something we really will. The image of the sweet melon and the bitter melon is also pointing to our efforts to find Buddha in our lives. Roshi Kapleau says, the sweet melon is sweet to the root, the bitter melon is bitter to the root. When you taste life's sweetness, it is thoroughly sweet. You encounter something bitter, and it is thoroughly bitter. What sort of Buddha are you searching for? It's said that when he died, a large rock fell down from a nearby mountain, and the sound could be heard of this falling rock for many, many miles around the monastery. He's said to have had 22 Dharma heirs, and one of those was Engo Guan Wu, who compiled the Hekigan Roku, the Blue Cliff record. So now we'll just turn to the case. Just very short. The story is just is assumed that we know it. It must have been a well-known folk tale, Chinese folk tale. The actual case is just Goso asking a monk, "Say and her soul separated, which is the true one?" And the first point in this, when you work on this, is to find a way to demonstrate Say's true self, to embody it. So Goso takes this old Chinese folktale as the basis for his question. It seems in the story that Say is torn. She's torn between her duty to her father and her love for Ochu. So much so that her body and her soul go off in different directions. Just really a footnote on this mention of the soul here. When Roshi Kapleau was working on this koan with Yasutani Roshi, he immediately objected and said, well, surely Buddhism teaches that there's no soul. And at that time, sometimes when in talking about the teaching of no self, it would be translated as no soul. And it's true that the teaching of Buddhism is that there's no abiding or independent or unchanging self that sort of transmigrates from body to body, that doesn't change itself. Rather, we see the nature of things as being cause and effect, as everything is cause and effect, constantly flowing and changing. But it doesn't mean that a consciousness that is not entirely dependent on the body isn't recognized in Buddhism. It's just that this consciousness is seen as something dependent that interacts with the material world, and that is conditioned by it and conditions it. And when Roshi Kapleau made this objection, Yasutani Roshi mentioned he had a student who would go leave his body at night and travel and visit people and have conversations with them. And later, one way or another, he was able to verify with those people that he visited that the conversations had taken place, or that the information exchange was actually true. And so Yasutani was sort of saying to Kapleau, well, it's not so implausible, this ghost story. And it made me think about a story that I heard from my own Dharma brother Sante Poroma about an experience he had of leaving his body after a sesshin. And he relates this story in his book, The Net of Indra, which is about consciousness and a rebirth. And he presents this personal experience as a perspective on the nature of consciousness. I'll just read a little passage here from this. Following one of my first sessions, I had another weird experience. I was lying in bed in a Rochester Zen Centre dormitory where we newcomers and less experienced people were bunked. It was the night after the end of an extremely intense 7-day retreat. It was raining heavily outside and the raindrops pattered in random staccato on the roof above my bunk. Gradually I slipped into a state of absolute stillness. It was as if everything had ceased happening, even my breath. I began to feel panic in discovering that I couldn't move. My body had frozen and felt heavy as lead. An enormous weight pressed down on my chest. Then something very strange happened. Suddenly, I was no longer pinned to the bunk. I was outdoors, soaring through the air towards downtown Rochester. It was raining, but I couldn't feel it. I had no body. Somewhere downtown, I saw a middle-aged man climbing into a taxi. But suddenly, I was there with him in the taxi, and even worse, I was there with him in his consciousness. It was a queer anomaly indeed, unlike anything I experienced before. It didn't feel like I had possessed him, but rather as if I'd become a fly on the wall of his mind, passively observing what was happening. He seemed not to have any awareness of my existence, but I was able to experience his thoughts and simultaneously observe the whole thing happening. He ducked into the taxi, and the driver said something about the relentless rain, and that anyway it was good for business because rain makes people take more taxis. The man mumbled something in reply, but was thinking that the weather was not good for his business. Suddenly I knew that he had a stable of sex workers who were getting less business tonight on account of the rain. I also knew, but don't ask me how, that he was married and planning to move to Florida with his wife within a few years. The next moment I was back in bed and able to move my body again. What I thought on reflection was that even this unfortunate person whose consciousness I had occupied was in an inexplicable way affected by the meditation retreat we had just completed. This experience did not resemble a dream at all and is still, after all these years, vivid to me. So just a little window into what is possible with our consciousness. And it's interesting that in this sort of ghost story, one say is immobilized and unspeaking in her bed, and the other say goes off with her sweetheart, Ochu. And I think this is a story that's quite easy for us to relate to in its depiction of this sense of being torn. In The Hidden Lamp, each of these stories has a commentator, and for this story it's Ajahn Linda Ruth Cutts, and she says the following about this story. The conventional elements of the story mirror many of the situations that brought me and many women to practice. Like, say, we may have grown up in circumstances in which we had little agency, where familial, religious, cultural, gender and social pressures were strong, and where meeting the prevailing expectations was conveyed as more important than anything else. Like, say, whose older sister had died. This is another element of the story. We may have been born into a family ecology with many challenges and intense karmic patterns. Like, say, we may have experienced great love, great loss, and great disappointment. Conditioned by this difficult environment, we try to relieve our pain in unskillful ways, resulting in feeling divided and distanced from our once lively self. Like the two says, unaware of each other, one drained of energy, sick in bed without speech, the other an active wife and mother, yet riven by contradiction and separation. Eventually we begin longing to be whole, for something real, for our true home. Which one is the true say? So behind this simple story we can see this sense of being divided, but also a longing to overcome that division. One say lies immobilized, the other seems to be happy and alive but feels estranged, incomplete. And what is the true say? What's the real say? This is really the question that Goso is presenting to us, and not really just about say, but about ourselves. We, all of us at different times can experience a sense of being divided, and somehow there being a barrier between us and really fully living our lives. We can feel pulled in different directions, stuck on the horns of this or that dilemma, or being tugged in different directions by different longings that we have. It could be wanting to practice more versus the demands and responsibilities we have for work or family. It could be feeling a calling to do some kind of creative work, but at the same time needing to earn a living. It could be feeling the need to be challenged, but at the same time wanting to feel safe. Or another way that we divide ourselves. We can do something that we feel is stupid, and then judge ourselves very harshly about it. Or conversely, we excel at something and then we feel proud, puffing ourselves up. So which one is in these is the true me? Is it the one who acts in a stupid way, or the one who beats that other one up? Am I then two selves, or is there one self? Our koans often kind of set a trap for us. Here, the question, which is the true say? Or in the koan mu, the question is, does a dog have the Buddha nature or not? Or in another one we have a Zengen tapping on a coffin and asking his teacher, alive or dead? We often long for things to be black and white, simple. This or that. If you say it's the say who went off with Ochu who's the real say, then you're saying the one lying in the bed isn't. And if you say the one lying in the bed is the true say, then you're saying the other one isn't. In the story, when the two says meet, they smile and then merge into each other. Ruth Cutts, in her commentary on this, says that the smile of recognition is the same as the Buddha's successor, Mahakashyapa's smile, when the world-honoured one on Vulture Peak held up a flower and winked. This was their transmission ceremony of nothing to transmit. Mahakashyapa understood that the Buddha and he himself were not actually separated. Who is the real Say? As in all the koans, you have to become completely one with Say to see who the true Say is. Here in this story, Goso uses this this dichotomy of body and soul as the basis for his question, but really we can apply it to all kinds of dualisms and dilemmas, material and immaterial. Unity and diversity. Emptiness and form. Commentary. If you realize the one, you will know that we pass from one husk to another like travellers stopping at an inn. But if this is not yet clear, don't rush about wildly. When earth, water, fire and air suddenly separate, you'll be like a crab struggling in boiling water with its 7 arms and 8 legs. Don't say I didn't warn you. So Mumon starts by saying, if you realize the one, you will know that we pass from one husk to another like travellers stopping at an inn. If you realize the one true Say, if you realize, in other words, your own true self, then you'll know that we pass from one husk to another like travellers stopping at an inn. You might think that this refers to the soul passing from one body to the next, but it's more fundamental than that. He's really talking here about something that happens much more frequently. We change from being children to being youths, to being adults, to being middle-aged, to being old. It's one way of understanding it. Our shape keeps shifting as we go through life. Or you could relate it to just how we pass from one emotional state to another through a day or a couple of hours. Our body and our consciousness are in constant flux. If we realize the one that he mentions here, the real true one, then we'll see all this change without being disturbed by it, without trying to arrest it in some way. When one then goes to say, if you're not clear about this, then don't rush about wildly. Really what he's saying here is, sit down, do zazen, stop and look Find out who you are for yourself. I think of Goso's doubt mass arising when he wanted to know what it meant to realize it personally, to know when the water was warm or cold. He continues, when earth, air, water, air and fire suddenly separate, you'll be like a crab struggling in boiling water with its 7 arms and 8 legs. Don't say I didn't warn you. This is a common way of referring to death, when the 4 elements disperse: earth, water, fire and air. If when we get to death we haven't resolved this matter, then we'll be like a crab flailing around in boiling water in agony. When I was doing hospice volunteering, the deaths that I witnessed of the different patients I worked with were generally not peaceful deaths. People struggle. We struggle because we identify so strongly with our bodies and our minds and life itself. We experience these as self, and it's very, very painful to watch them disperse, to disintegrate. Sante talks about this in his book, Net of Indra. We are all deeply affected by the fact that we will die. Death is the most outrageous injustice that happens to us, because life, after all, is all we have. Without our lives, we are literally nothing. The fact that we exist means everything. If you didn't exist, then nothing would exist, at least for you. The fact that we exist and that we experience ourselves to exist has, in other words, a value that cannot be valued. Life is priceless. How preposterous death seems in the light of life's singular significance. We hardly have time to get used to the fact that we are alive, and barely learn to appreciate the inconceivable value of this life before death comes and just takes it all away from us. All of it. Our whole life and all its memories, all the birthdays we ever celebrated, all the loves, friends, sumptuous dinners, all the insights we have ever reached, all the sorrow and all the joy. It is all annihilated in a moment. Death appears to nullify everything. Nothing remains, and it is no consolation that others live on a while longer, because we're not even there to be consoled. Mumon here is not just talking about a literal death either. It could also include all the other kinds of little deaths that we experience in our lives. Being criticized, losing faith, suffering, loss of our job, or somebody we love. We're struggling in our lives in different ways. Struggling with uncertainty or not knowing. Really, this work that we do is urgent work. to see for ourselves who the true person is. To see beyond the surface change. Don't rush about wildly. Verse. The moon among clouds is ever the same, different from each other, the mountain and the valley. How wonderful, how blessed. Is this one, is this two? In Zen, the moon and the clouds are a very often used image. Clouds often for our delusions, but even more than that, for the forms that our mind takes. Different states we go through. While the clouds change and shift, the moon is always the same moon. This was something that used to strike me when I was far away from home, when I was in Rochester with Richard here in New Zealand. And sometimes at night I would look up at the moon, and it was somehow reassuring to know that when he looked up into the sky, he would be seeing the same moon that I saw. It might be a different time, but it would be the same moon, the same phase of the moon. And this light is there even when there are clouds in the sky. No matter what the forms our mind takes, the light of awareness is there experiencing those forms. Different from each other, the mountain and the valley. Mountains and valleys are, yes, different from each other. Everybody knows that who's spent time climbing in mountains and valleys. But you can't show the point where one begins and the other ends. They're actually completely dependent on each other for their existence. And both are illuminated by that bright moon in the sky. How wonderful, how blessed. Is this one? Is this two? How extraordinary that we experience anything. How strange to be alive in this world with all its myriad forms. And this mind of ours that experiences everything. How wonderful. Another point of the koan is to respond to this. Is this one? Is this two? How to express this truth. But really, if we understand the first three lines of this verse, then these questions at the end are superfluous. Just this lamplight on the lectern. People sitting in the room, breathing. The moon shining outside in the sky. We'll stop here and recite 4 vows.